what's up everybody? Chad Calek here, and welcome back to the In a Crowded Room podcast for episode number 126, which on today's episode I'm going to tell you a story. It's actually part one of a two-parter, and this was inspired by a letter I got from a girl named Janet, who resides in Canada actually. And in this letter she had some personal experiences, and she wanted to kind of I guess debate would be the term. She wanted to debate with me whether or not the demonic was real versus spirit influence, which they're two different things. The demonic and possession, what she was referring to, that's when your entire free will is completely taken over by some manifestation of evil. You can call it a demon, elemental, whatever you want to call it. And that's different than spirit influence, is when a spirit, positive or negative, is influencing someone's emotions and often the outcome of events. It's kind of like pushing a person in a direction. And she was kind of wondering how I felt about, the presence of either. But what she dealt with specifically from reading her accounts, and because she hasn't given me the right to tell her story, I don't want to, but what I can say is it sounded to me more like spirit influence than it did possession. And I am a believer in spirit influence. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to tell you a crazy story. And it relates, when it's all said and done, it's actually going to relate to a series of live events that I did in the very beginning when I first started doing them. And it seems kind of fitting with the announcement of the Texas event. But it actually starts out and takes place in Philadelphia. Right when I first got into the public side of the paranormal, because I had spent a good, 10 years, 15 years privately researching before I ever decided, all right, well, I'm going to let the world see what I've been doing and tell my stories for the public to look into, and also make films about the paranormal. And when I first started doing that, a lot of people were saying, you should host events. And I heard that for about a year. And initially I was like, no, I don't want to host an event because, what if something happens to somebody? And I just don't want to be responsible if anybody gets hurt or anything spiritual happens. And over time I started to come to terms with that I'm not playing God. I mean, things are going to happen how they happen. And if I feel like, hosting an event would be a positive thing, I should do it. So I had my eyes open for new locations because I didn't want to just do the same places that everybody has done 1,000 times. I wanted to do something new. Well, at that time, I had just finished up my first film, which was not a paranormal film. It was actually a film that I just wrote. I didn't direct it or anything like that. It was a film called The Private Public. And it was actually like it was a fictional film based off a college experience. And it was fun, but I had gotten to the directing side. But when I did that first film, one of the people that I met that helped me out in the beginning and really kind of understanding film production, in addition to Justin Holstein, was my friend Glenn Nasons. And I actually met Glenn through that film. Glenn was actually, for those of you that watched The Real World San Francisco, way back in the day, The Real World, there was this character Puck that got in all kinds of arguments with this guy Pedro, and Pedro was one of the first characters to ever have HIV on television. And it was kind of a big deal, and this Puck guy ended up getting kicked out of this Real World house, and Glenn replaced Puck. And he had a band called Perch. And I was interested in his band, and I saw him on the series, and I remember hearing his band. It was the segment with his band was just wild, and I ended up finding him online. This was like right when bands first had websites, and my website was as bad as his back in the day. But we had one, we were out in front, way ahead of everybody. And Glenn had just became a friend of mine over the years. And whenever I would go through Philadelphia for business or anything else, I would always hook up with Glenn. His family are restaurateurs. They own some of the best restaurants. And if you're a foodie, trust me, you want to go down to Germantown and spend some time with Glenn and his family, because every meal I've eaten at his place has been incredible. But I was down there actually to see him because he had some friends that he had met. A couple of them met him also through kind of his real world notoriety. But they connected him to this group of friends from New Haven, Connecticut, that were making an independent film. And at the time, they needed an independent producer as well. And Glenn was like, well, look, I did this movie with Chad, and they did the film right. They made a solid feature. They released it the right way. Had a great soundtrack. I know he knows how to make a movie. So Chad, I want you to meet these guys. And I was like, super cool. Well, at that time, Glenn was also in the beginning. I feel bad because I should have paid attention more to what he was saying. It's just sometimes I can just get tunnel vision on my own thing, and it's hard for me to think about a bunch of different projects at once. But Glenn was telling me the whole time that he was so excited for me to see his new house, and it was on this land he bought. And I remember thinking, well, that's cool. My friend bought a house, and I was super young back then. Probably 24, if even that. And so I didn't have a lot of 24-year-old friends of mine that had houses. Now, Glenn was older than me, but still, I was like, it's cool that he has a house. And he kept telling me, you got to come see it. It's this super old house that, I don't know what the exact details were, but he won it in some kind of auction. He bid on it, and the city awarded it to him. And he had to fix it up in a certain time period, basically, to keep it. And he named the estate Danny Brooke. That's what he named it. But it was an old building that ran, what I knew before I ever saw it, that it ran along this Sandy Run Creek, and it was right in an area known as White Marsh. And he told me some history about it that kind of blew me away. And he's basically, there was this smaller kind of skirmish called the Battle of White Marsh, and it could have ended the war because George Washington and his troops, who were like heavily battered, ended up staying along this Sandy Run Creek, and the British had sent this small, kind of like their version of the Green Berets, this small brigade to basically sneak in and kill George Washington along the Sandy Run Creek in White Marsh. It ended up being the first time in history that United States forces used guerrilla warfare. And the reason they did is simply because Washington and his troops were beat up. They were practically starving. They were almost out of ammunition. And they just got word from a girl who was actually just literally walking from one town to the other, who saw this Queen's Brigade, who saw them, and she walked all the way back to the Sandy Run Creek and basically gave George Washington and his troops a heads up. And it was right literally where this house was that he had bought. In fact, the house that he had bought was actually used as a makeshift hospital for George Washington and his troops. Now, thankfully, because they received the tip that this brigade was coming, they were able to defeat them. And from there, they ended up making their way to Valley Forge, and the rest is history. But had Washington been killed and struck down there during this attack, I mean, the entire history of our country would be different. But this all took place there. So Glenn's home that he just bought, which I had not seen yet, again, this thing was like a major, major piece of history that was a makeshift hospital for George Washington and his troops. So the reason I'm telling you about this house is because when I flew into Philadelphia, Glenn picked me up at the airport, and before I can get a hotel room or anything, he just said, I need your help. I'm going to do this porch raising. And my friends, Frankie, Chris, Seth, and Neil. Now these names will become identifiable to you throughout the story as I tell it. But these are the filmmaker guys. He says they're all going to come out and help me too, and I just need your help because I got to get this, do this porch raising for my new place, and I haven't, seen it yet or anything, and I'm like, okay, but before I go out there, I'm like, let me get a hotel room. I haven't got one yet, and he said, okay. So I found one really close for just one night, not even for the second night yet, because I didn't know what we're going to be doing the following night. But I got a hotel room close by to him, and he said, okay, on the way out to the hotel room, I'm going to stop by, Danny Brooke. I want you to see this. And I'm like, okay. And by the time we get there, it's just jet black, dark. I mean, it's probably 9, 10 o'clock at night. I had flown in late. And we pull up to this long road. And first off, it's, Blair Witchian. If you've ever been in the woods in Pennsylvania, I mean, it's straight, that is Blair Witch territory. And so I'm like, okay. And it just feels like Blair Witch, this long and winding road to this house. And in my head, I guess I was just thinking, oh, it's an old house. I mean, this is like older than old. I think it was like 1750 or something like that is when it was built, or 1700, like way super old. So we're driving this, long, creepy road, and he shows up, and I can barely see in the headlights kind of the bottom of what's going to be his future house. And this is the building, the makeshift hospital. And I'm like, wow, this thing is super old. And as we're getting closer and closer to that building, I am just getting super geeked out. Now remember, you're talking to somebody, man. I have been in the scariest buildings you've ever seen and have not affect me at all. Like, I mean, I've been in, you name it. Everything from asylums to prisons to, like, you name it, I've been there. So just an old building shouldn't geek me out. But as we get closer and closer to it, I'm just, man, I am not feeling right. Just something doesn't feel right. Now, keep in mind, I'm not psychic in any way. I can't speak to, spirits, or I don't know who's what in the room, or I'm not psychic. But I do think everybody has kind of an intuition, right? The same way kind of a seasoned cop knows when someone's lying. You've done it enough, you start to tell, So as we're getting closer, I don't want to say anything to Glenn because this is his house he just bought, and we get up to the building, and I'm telling you, the creepiness is just emanating off this thing. And I do not want to go inside, but he wants me to come inside. And there's not even a door at this point. It's like this big wooden piece of plywood that's kind of a makeshift door, because the doors have been ripped off the place by local vandals, like kids, just doing stupid kid shit, So I'm getting up there, and he opens the door, and there's a few things inside the house, and we go in the front room, and I am not feeling this place, man. Everything in my body is just screaming, get out. I mean, oh man, I was just so incredibly uncomfortable. And more than anything else, I've said this before. I told this story one time we were at Danny Brooke. I was talking to some other people about it. And what was really weird is that it felt like whatever was there knew me. And I don't know why. And it's hard for me to explain that, like in words, I guess. But there was a familiarity of some kind. It just felt familiar. But we get to the main floor. I am not wanting to be in this place, and he just running around. He's telling me this piece of history here and this piece of history here, and there was a child who was killed out on here in this with some cow, I guess, sat on a kid and killed him, and like just a crazy history. And this is where they found I guess on his property there's like old bayonets and stuff. I mean, it's just crazy, this history and how old this building is. And you get to the second floor, and I'm following him. And at this point, man, again, everything in my body is saying, do not take another step. Do not take another step. And he starts to go up to the third floor, and I finally just stop and go, yo, Glenn, listen, I got to get out of here, dude. I got to get out of here. Everything about this place is freaking me out to no end. and I'm sorry to say that you just bought it, but this place is crazy haunted, and I've got to get out of here. And he's looking at me like, no, this isn't haunted. No, why do you say that? And I'm just like, Glenn, if you're not feeling it, that's cool, man. But I'm telling you, I want nothing to do with it, man. I'm freaked out, So I do. I go down the stairs, and Glenn follows me out. I mean, I could not wait to get out of that place, and I got out of there, and we walked on the property. I still felt, definitely uncomfortable on the property, but not as bad as being in the actual building. So we ended up talking on the property for a long time, and I started asking him more questions about the history, and it was a fascinating history. I mean, I was like, wow, this is insane, man. So to make a long story short, we just talked about it that night, and Glenn ended up, taking me to my hotel room, which I only got for one night that night. So the following day, around midday, we're supposed to meet back at Danny Brooke, and I'm going to meet Frankie, Chris, Neil, and Seth. Okay, so we do, and I show up, and Glenn's got this little like tractor, like this this little tractor he's driving. It turns out it's not a roof or porch raising; it's a porch demolition. And basically, he's ripping the porch off this thing, and he's got all of us out there to just carry all of this stuff to make a pile, basically. But Glenn had been there, and helped me out in a lot of different ways when I was first starting. So I was like, this sucks, but it's my boy, and I'll help him. That's totally cool. And he's introducing me to these guys from New Haven that, potentially have a film that we're going to work on together. Now, let's go down the list of characters. Frankie Mosca, he's the director, the main guy that has written this script. And he later changed the name to This Wretched Life, but at one point it was called Parnassus. He's a little like a mini Al Pacino. I'm not kidding. Like, this kid looks like Al Pacino, sounds like Al Pacino, slicks his hair back like a young Al Pacino, like Godfather Al Pacino. To the point where it was just like, Jesus, is this guy Pacino's kid? Like, this is crazy. And then his friend, Chris Plakaitis, who's cool as can be, is like, a spitting image of a young Sean Penn, like a Fast Times at Ridgemont High Sean Penn. So they're obviously the film guys, and they're way into, they're just cool dudes. And I hit it off with both of them right away. Knew I wanted to work with them right away just because of their personalities and their characters. And like I said, they're both from New Haven, Connecticut. So they've got, every crazy story. Here in New Haven, it's a wild town. You have Yale there, which is immaculate, but it's surrounded just by, just the most hardcore, hood in the world. It's a crazy town, but these guys have huge personalities, and I love both their personalities. And then they have this kid, Neil Damiano, who's with them. And it's not that I dislike Neil. I liked Neil, but he was a little, to be completely honest, I felt like he was like watching me. It was like, I don't know, like when you talk to someone and they're like, usually there's eye contact you make. I would find him looking at my shoes and then looking at my jeans, and he kind of made me feel uncomfortable in the beginning. Later on, I come to learn that's not the case at all. He's just basically he met Glenn through his fandom for the Real World. And Neil was trying way back then to do a local PBS show where he interviewed people he found were interesting. And he had kind of made his way through these circles and met a lot of real worlders that were on the show. And what I found out later on, he was trying to be a journalist, and he would journal about a lot of things. So he was just paying close attention to who I was, for his own kind of reasons, and I really do believe they were journalistic. So it was just strange because I had not met somebody that I felt like was just scanning me over whenever I would talk to him. That's the best way I can to describe it. And so that was my initial impression of him. And then the other guy, Seth, same thing. He had met Glenn kind of through Glenn's fandom, or through Seth's fandom for the real world. And Seth was just big dude, big guy, like probably, 6'2" or so. Just big, thick, huge guy. And as nice as can be, but socially awkward. Just very kind of quiet and kind of stuttering a little bit at times, which, believe me, I will never give anybody a hard time for stuttering. I still do it now. I just did it. I had a stuttering problem bad when I was young. Actually had to go to speech therapy for that, believe it or not, guys. But I picked up on that right away, that he kind of had some stuttering things. But he was, like I said, quiet, super quiet. Always listening, always very aware, always had an ear to the conversation, always knew where we were at in the conversation, but didn't offer a lot in the way of, being vocal. And, I was fine with that. I was like, that's, cool. So cool enough guys, So we do this, this porch demolition thing for Glenn, and I'm just getting to know the guys as we're doing it. And again, super cool, super cool guys. It was all fine. And we get done, and Glenn just kind of having a blast with this. The fact that he's got us all out there working for him and basically stacking up his porch that he ripped off with the tractor. And so that night, they decide, Seth, Chris, Neil, and Frankie, they decide they're going to go down to downtown Philadelphia, and they're going to have a few beers at the bar, and they're going to hang out for dinner, where because I just want to spend some time with Glenn too, and Glenn knows that I didn't drink at the time, I'm just going to go have dinner at a restaurant owned by, I believe, Glenn's brother at that time, and or partially by Glenn, I'm not sure. So it was nice. It was really cool. I went down. I had a good dinner with Glenn, and he filled me in more on his place, and we talked about the old film, and his the good times we had, and also he was talking about his time frame to finish up Danny Brooke, and he started asking me again about the paranormal stuff, and I just said, listen, man, I felt it all day today too, which I did the whole time that we were cleaning up that porch. I felt it. And I didn't want to say that to him. I really didn't. I did not want to say that to him, but I knew he was going to have issues with this place. In the long run, he would have issues with this place. And I could tell that, he didn't really want to hear that in the beginning. And why would you? Why would anybody want to hear, I just bought this place and, this ghost hunter's here and thinks it's haunted now. So, anyways, the plan was, after dinner, I was going to go back with Glenn to Danny Brooke. And because he had a bunch of stuff he was going to be doing. He's going to be working out there all night. And then Seth, Chris, Neil, and Frankie were going to all come back to Danny Brooke as well. And we were going to hang out a little bit now and really kind of get into the details about their movie. And then at that point, I would wrap it up for the night, and I would go find, a hotel, which I was planning on getting the same one again for another night. But at that point, because I just didn't know how the night was going to go, I didn't have another hotel room booked yet, and I travel super light too. So I only had like a bag with me with one set of jeans and another shirt. I didn't have much with me. So we get back there, and nobody's back there. It's just Glenn and me, and he's like, well, I'm going to get to, working on this stuff. And I'm like, well, that's cool. I'll just hang out and wait for these guys. And hours went by, like 2 or 3 hours. And I was thinking, well, that's kind of rude. We hung out all day long. And, we talked a little bit about the movie, but it was hard because we were doing this, porch thing. And here I am waiting to talk to these guys. And they're not back there. So then I look up and I see this taxi coming down this long, scary road of Glenn's at Danny Brooke. Taxi pulls up. Frankie and Neil Damiano hop out. I'm like, no Seth, no Chris. I'm like, that's interesting. Well, Frankie's the director of the movie, so I guess as long as he's there, I could talk about the film. But I'm just like, hey, so what happened with Seth and with Chris? Well, I guess when they went downtown, now Neil had driven there. Neil's car was there, okay? But when they went downtown, Seth had a truck, and everybody could fit in his truck. And Seth was like, well, okay, I'll drive. I'll be the designated driver, So they all went downtown, and I guess they hang out. They had their beers, and it turns out that Chris started rocking, had a few more beers, and he didn't want to go. He wanted to party some more. So Seth said, well, you guys, if you want to catch a cab back, then I'll hang out with him, and I'll make sure that he gets home okay. And I'm like, okay, so he's just down there partying, just downtown right now? And they're like, yeah, Frankie's like, in his Al Pacino way, he's like, yeah, he'll be back, don't worry about it, and stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, as long as he's cool. So we ended up talking about, his film, and the whole time, Neil's hanging out. And what I didn't know at that time is Neil was kind of had this backdoor kind of looping way into Frankie's film. And that's another reason why Neil was kind of paying so much of attention to me, because he knew about my other film, and he, wants to hit it off well with me because he wants to get on this film as well. So he's got, every intention of working on this movie as well. So Frankie's telling me all about the film, and Neil's just kind of, backing him up on everything he says. And it must have been 2 or 3 hours that we talked about this film. And then suddenly I say, guys, it's really starting to get late. It's probably like 9:30, 10 o'clock. And I'm like, should we be calling Seth or, Chris to see what's going on? And they're like, yeah, no problem. Let's call them. So they're calling both of their cell phones, and no one's answering. Like, no one's answering at all. I'm like, no one's answering. I'm like, that's kind of creepy, don't you think? I mean, like, why wouldn't they be answering? Like, and, Frankie's like, yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, they're just partying, I'm sure it's fine. And I'm like, is it? I'm like, how well do you guys know Seth? And both of them are like, I don't know him at all. I just met him for, like, the first time. And Neil's like, I've met him, like, one other time, but that's about it. And I go, huh. And it's quiet, and Frankie goes, it's kind of creepy, isn't he? I go, Seth? I go, well, he's quiet, he's observant and quiet, and Neil's like, yeah, he was like that last time too. And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. I'm like, you guys don't really know him that well though, huh? And they're like, no. And I go, well, I'm sure everything's okay then. And Frankie's like, yeah, I'm sure everything's okay. Not a big deal. So I'm like, okay. So I, kind of just sitting there trying to figure out what I'm going to do for the night. And I see Glenn walking around in a circle. And, I go talk to Glenn. And he's still working on his house. And he's giving me a hard time about, come on in. I'm like, no, dude, the place is haunted. This whole area creeps me out, man. I've been creeped out the whole time I'm here. And he's like, well, you guys are welcome to do, whatever. And I'm like, well, what's going on with Seth and Chris? I mean, they're still down. He was like, oh, they're still partying. I'm like, yeah, they're still partying down there. And he's like, I don't know. It'll probably be back, though. Probably be okay. And I'm like, all right, that's cool. So I go back over, and it's starting to get cold. And we're all talking, about the movie more. And Neil's like, man, it's getting cold, man. You guys want to sit in my car? And I'm like, yeah, sure, So we get in his car, and we turn the heat on, like, just cranking the heat in the car. And we're talking more about the movie, had great talks about the movie. But then we get back on the conversation of Chris and and Seth. And I said, I don't know, wouldn't it be freaky, man, if like Seth was just like some, And before I could even say it, Frankie goes, serial killer? I start laughing. I go, no, I'm not saying he's a serial killer. I'm just saying, like, what, he kind of has that demeanor of, like, if you heard tomorrow that this quiet, observant guy, just off Tappa City block, would you be that surprised? And we're kind of, like, joking about it. And Frankie's going, he does have pretty weird demeanor, though. And he goes, I did kind of find it weird that he was saying that we should take a taxi back and he would stay with him. And I go, yeah, I would think it would be the opposite way. I would think that he would take you back and just tell Chris, hey man, catch a cab whenever you're done. Because the dude's partying and Seth doesn't drink. And he's like, yeah, that is weird, isn't it? Like, yeah, I think it's real weird. And I really truthfully did at that time that I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, God, I'm just saying, I got a weird feeling about all this. I'm like, have you guys called them again? And he's like, no, man. Yeah, we should call him again, though. Call him again. Nobody's answering. At this point, it's like, midnight, maybe 12:30, like it's late. Glenn's still, there's an old light on. He's still working in his house. And we all get there talking, and I'm like, well, listen, man, I want to go get a hotel room, but I want to know he's okay. And I'm like, so let's just sit here for a little bit. But I got to tell you guys, 1 o'clock hits, 1:30 hits. Like, I'm out of here, man. I got to go get a room. They're like, well, that's cool. They're like, you can go if you want right now. And I'm like, well, no, that's cool. Well, I'll chill here. I just want everybody's okay. But, I definitely have a time limit on this. So we get talking. You ever have that conversation, you just reach that point where things just kind of get silent and maybe you just don't have much to say anymore. So we talked just about everything we could with the film. I'd already decided I wanted to work with these guys. And I'm just kind of sitting there, staring out the window, looking at Danny Brooke. And I'm like, man, that is just a creepy building. And the next thing I know, I'm just getting warmer and warmer and warmer. And I could feel myself getting tired. And the next thing you know, I just fall asleep. Just out. And I open my eyes right as I hear this hand just smash against the window. And all I see is this face that looks like it's bloody. And someone screaming, help me! And I just let out the craziest scream. I'm just like, bah! I freak out. Then behind me, Frankie just sits up. He fell asleep. He's going, bah! We're all screaming. And someone's beating, like their face is in my face. Next one, and it totally, like once my REM, because I was like a deep REM sleep, once I figure out what's going on, like 5 seconds later, it's Neil. Neil got out of his car, went walking around to go to the bathroom, came back, and he had locked himself out. And he got super freaked out outside the car, and he said he was like doing the knick-knack, just tap, tap, tap thing on the window, and we were not answering, so he started just hitting the window harder, and we weren't answering, so he just started screaming, hey, open up, and was beating the window. Well, when I woke up, I am telling you, I saw a dude's face 6 inches from mine that appeared to be bloody and beaten, and it was just my brain going haywire, coming out of like a deep sleep, and I was so incredibly freaked out. I'm like, what is going on with me? Why did I think Neil was, a bloody face? It has to be my brain. It has to be REM, right? Like I'm in deep REM, and something pulled me out of it. And I'm just like, Jesus, man. So I open the door, and he comes around, and he explains everything, and I'm just like, God. And I go, man, where is Chris? Where is Seth? What is going on? And Frankie at this point is like, yeah, dude, I'm starting to get freaked out. Like, what is going on? I'm like, I don't know. Call them again. They call them again. Nothing. Nobody answering. And I go, all right, man, well, this is just weird. I go, I just need to go find Glenn, and he needs to do something, man. Like, we need to go back to the bar where they were at or something. I don't know. But, someone's got to do something, or else I'm going to be done with this whole thing. I'm freaked out at this point. So I'm trying to find Glenn, and I can't find him anywhere. I can't find him anywhere. His vehicle's gone. He had a truck he drove. He's gone. Like, nowhere. And I'm like, what in the hell? But I remembered at dinner, Glenn had told me that his wife and kids were not going to be staying at his house because Seth had drove up, and Seth was going to be helping him work on this porch demolition like the whole weekend. So his wife and kids, I think they stayed with a relative, and Seth was going to be staying with Glenn. So I said to him, I go, guys, I bet I know what happened. I bet Glenn finished up, and we were all asleep in your car. And it's not like it's not like Glenn views this as dangerous out here. It's his property. We're all asleep inside a car that's locked. He probably just went to his house, and I'll bet you anything right now, Seth is back there asleep, and Chris is probably passed out on his couch. That's probably what's going on. We're just freaking each other out. And I'm like, does anybody have Glenn's address? And Frankie's like, I have it. I'm like, okay, can you find it? He digs around. Thank God he does have it. And I'm like, all right, man, let's just drive over there, because I'll bet you they're all sitting there, and our minds are just getting, the best of us right now. And they're like, okay, cool. So we go driving over there, and remember, Neil is driving, Frankie's in the back seat, I'm in the front. We get over to Glenn's place, which was weird about that too, is, man, his house was probably should have been a 10-minute drive, and it seemed like it took us 45 minutes to get there. It was really close, from where, I don't know, it just seemed like every road we took us down a wrong road, but I've experienced this before too, this kind of like where nothing seems to add up as far as directions and time. And so anyways, we finally pull up to his house, and right when we pull up, I notice a couple things. And the first one, Neil points out. Neil says, where's his vehicle? And it's not parked in front. I'm like, oh man, I don't know. And I'm like, well, I don't see Seth's truck either. But I look at the house, and every light in the house is jet black. And it's like a 2-story house plus a basement. And the only reason that was weird to me is because, like, in my house, like growing up, and granted we had a haunted house too, but we had night lights and different lamps and things like that if someone were to stay with us, we would always keep those on, because people don't know the lay of the land, right? Like, if you get up in some stranger's house in the middle of the night, you don't want to be walking around when it's jet black. I mean, you want some little things to give enough light to show the way. But there's like nothing. There's nothing on in Glenn's house. So I say to them, I'm like, well, hold on. I remembered there was one time before where really quickly I had been to this house. And in back of the house, I remember there was like this cemented like car park area, and it would have been big enough for 2 cars to be. And I said, you know what, I bet they're just parked in back. And so we got to go there. And you have to see the way it's laid out. But basically, we went up a half a block, you turn, and then there's a skinny little alley that you take down behind it. And then I pulled up, and as we did that, and of course, no vehicles. So we pull into this little car park area right behind the house, but we can see the whole house. Second floor, main floor, we can see it all. It's right there. And we're just staring at it. And I'm just like, man, what is going on? There's no Glenn. We cannot find Glenn. Chris and Seth are not answering the phone. Why on earth did Seth say I'll stay with him when Seth's not a drinker and send you guys back? Now we can't get a hold of anybody. We don't know what... I mean, this whole thing is bizarro. And Frankie's going, dude, I'm telling you, man, I get a bad feeling. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, dude, we're like, joking about that serial killer shit, but I'm telling you, dude, I got a bad feeling about him. I'm like, yeah? And he's like, yeah, dude. He goes, he does act weird, man. And I'm like, yeah, just a quietness thing? And he's like, well, that, and yeah, he's just always around, man. He's always got an ear open, but, he just never hardly talks at all. He's always around. He's always, just whatever Glenn wants and needs. It's like he'll do whatever Glenn wants, and I don't know, man. He goes, I just think maybe there's a lot more to this guy than we know. And I'm like, yeah, man, that is weird. And he's going, yeah, that is weird. He should have taken us home. You're right. I'm like, yeah, well, I agree. It's strange, but I don't know him well enough to say, the guy's a killer, for Christ's sakes. I can't even think we're even talking about this right now. But I'm telling you, every bone in my body was leaning in that direction. And I'm like, well, we clearly, we got to go inside the house. And Frankie and Neil are both like, dude, what? I'm like, yeah, we got to go inside the house. And they're like, dude, there ain't nobody there. I go, well, then we go knock on the door, and if there's nobody there, there's nobody there. There's nothing we can do at that point. I guess we go back to Danny Brooke. I don't know, but we got to go in the house and see if they're there. And they're both like, oh, man, I don't want to do that. We don't got to go in the house. There clearly ain't anybody there. And I'm like, well, I know, but we got to go try. And they're like, no, man, there ain't nobody there. I'm not going in there. There ain't nobody there. I'm like, all right. I'm like, are you sure? And he's like, no, there ain't no reason to go in. I'm like, okay. And I'm looking at the house, and the top bathroom light comes on. Just one single light, no bedroom light. The bathroom light comes on. And we just see a big shadow walk in there, and then the light shuts off. And I'm like, oh my God. Who is on the top floor alone right now? We are freaked out. Frankie's going, dude, man, my pulse is beating, man. I'm like freaked. Neil's like freaked. I'm freaked. I'm just sitting there going, whoa, what is going on right now? If there's someone in the house here, how did they get here with no car, with no anything, with no nothing? Like, what is going on? So I'm like, okay, we got to go in the house. And, man, trust me, this was a heated conversation. And, it went back and forth from, we ain't going in the house, screw that, I don't care what happened, to, we have to go in the house and battle plans to kill Seth if something goes wrong. Like, we're totally freaked out. We're having the most insane conversation about this. I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I am so freaked out. So finally, what we came down to is I said, listen, Neil, you're the getaway driver. Frankie, you got to go to that third floor, and you got to open up that door, and we got to know who's in there. And I go, I'm going to stay at the bottom of the stairs. He's like, why are you staying at the bottom of the stairs? And I'm like, dude, I'm way too big, man. I'm like, if something goes wrong upstairs and I got to come running downstairs, I guarantee I'm going to fall down those things. Where it's different, man. If I got to come up, that's a different story. Or if you're coming down, I'm right there. I came up with every excuse and every reason in the world why I was not going to go knock on that door, man. But it actually made sense because Frankie was smaller, he was nimble, as I had the agility of a mountain goat. So we decide this is what we're doing. Neil's just staying in the car with it running in case we come firing out of there. And Frankie and I, we both make our way to the front door. Frankie reaches for the front door right away, and I'm looking at his hand slowly going, man, is this thing going to open or not? He twists the door. It's open. I'm like, oh my God, we're going in this place. I was just praying that we're going to open the door and Glenn's going to be just asleep right there. We open the door. Nothing. Nobody on the couch. Nothing. We're both standing there, like in the living room, talking to each other, like in this super low voice, just going, do you hear anything? No. How about you? No. Gotta go up the stairs, Frank. I know. Don't tell me what I gotta do. All this stuff. So he's like freaked. He starts making his way up the stairs, and every stair, he is so gently stepping on each stair because you don't want to make anything creak. You don't, if there is somebody up there, obviously, you don't want to give away that you're coming up. But we should have thought about that because when we opened the door, the screen door was loud as hell. So, but anyways, I'm watching him, and it seems like it takes him 15, 20 minutes to get to the top of the stairs. I'm sure it was faster, but at the time, it was just so intense at that time. It just seemed like it took forever. So he gets to the top of the stairs, and he stands there and just looking back at me, and he's looking down the hallway. And at the time we were terrified, so I can only imagine how terrified he was at that moment. He looks at me, he kind of nods his head yes, he turns around back, and he starts making his way down the hallway. And eventually he's out of sight. He's past the side wall, so I can't see him, right? I just hear a door open. And then there's like 10 or 11 seconds of like nothing. Just dead silent. I hear the door shut and Frankie comes firing down those stairs. He's going, go, 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 go. I mean, I'm out the door, man. I mean, I'm like, I could have ran through the thing. I was so freaked out. But I'm out the door. I run in. I didn't even wait for Frankie to tell me what happened. I'm in the car, man. I go through the passenger side. I'm in. Frankie runs behind me. He's like, dude, get the damn seat forward. And he's like freaking out. And he hops in the back seat. He goes, you're not going to believe what I saw. You're not going to believe what I saw. And I'm like, what? He goes, you're not going to believe it, dude. I'm standing in the hallway. And he's like, all of a sudden I hear a lamp go off. I'm like, you did? And he goes, yeah, it was at the door next to me. I opened it up. Dude. I'm like, what? He goes, it was Seth. He was sitting in his underwear, but he was covered in sweat. He just had sweat beads all over his head and his whole body. And I'm like, he was sitting in his underwear covered in sweat? Jesus. I'm like, was there anybody else up there? No. I'm like, so he was sitting alone in his underwear covered in sweat. He goes, yes. I mean, as we're doing this, Neil is just booking it. I mean, he is just, we are going so fast down the road. And we finally, get to a point where we're several blocks away, and he slows, way down. We're making our way back to Dannybrooke because we don't really know what else to do at this point. And we're just convinced. At this point, we're convinced that this guy's up to no good. He's sweating, and he's up there, and he has his clothes off because there's blood all over him, and he's sweating because it must have been a physical altercation, and maybe he offed Glenn too. Maybe that's why we can't find Glenn. And I'm just like, oh my God, dude, what is going on? This has become like the most terrifying night of my life. And it's so funny because when I tell the story now, it all seems so nonsensical. It seems so nonsensical. So we get back and we pull up down the long road to Dannybrooke, and I'm just like, man, we gotta call the police. We definitely have to call the police. So we do. We 911 it, and we say, hey, this is where we're at. This is what's up. And they're sending a police officer out to talk to us. I'm just like freaking out, man. Completely freaking out. I didn't want to sit in the car. I'm like, I get out of the car. I don't want to go near the house, but I'm just like pacing because I'm just like, what is going, like, everybody that but us is gone and we can't find anyone, and I don't know what is happening. I'm just like, oh my God, like, what is going on? A couple minutes later, I see these two headlights, and I'm like, oh, there's the cop. There's the cop. It's a police car. There's the cop. And as these lights are coming up, I see this yellow jacket to the left of me walking around. I look over, and it's Glenn. I was like, Glenn, like, what are you doing? And he comes over, and I'm just talking a million miles an hour. I'm going, dude, we looked you forever for your vehicle wasn't here. We went to your house, and Blakitis is gone. Like, dude, we think Seth killed him, and we're like, Seth is, he's got his underwear on, and he's in your house alone with sweat beads. And like, Glenn is like looking at us like, what are you doing right now? Like, what is wrong with you guys? And we're all freaking out, all of us. And I'm like, where's your vehicle, man? Where's your vehicle? What's going on? He's just like, dude, he was like, I was moving different shit around and picking stuff up. I parked around back. And then he had some wine. He was just drinking wine. And he just like kind of passed out on his own property. Just laid down on this concrete area and just went for a nap, which is completely reasonable. It's his property. It's what, every time in the morning is. And I look at those two lights coming up like, oh my God, thank God the cops are here. We're going to tell them and they're going to totally help us what's going on. And we show up and it's not the cops. It's not the cops. It's a cab with Chris. And at this point, it's like 3:30 in the morning. It's like super late. I'm like, oh my God. And Chris gets out and he's like, wasted. And we're like, dude, where have you been? Like, what is going on, dude? We thought Seth killed you. And the same thing, we're like, we were out asleep out here. And the guy was freaking went to the sense there. And he's sweating. He's got his clothes off. And we thought Glenn was dead, dude, but he's alive now. And he's looking at us like, what have you guys been drinking? And he was just like, dude, listen, I just kept partying and Seth got tired and wanted to go home, so he went home, and he was like, and I took a cab, and the cab was a cool dude, and I ended up partying with him. I'm like, wait a minute, you party with the cabbie? He's like, yeah, that is weird, dude, that is weird. I'm like, you went back to the cab driver's house and partied? And he's like, yeah, it's up like an hour ago. It's like, wow, and he just drove you here, and he's like, yeah, I'm fine, man, I'm totally cool. And we're like, well, explain Seth back there, half naked and sweat. So what it turns out is all that happened was is Seth ended up just going back to where Glenn's house is, in which when he got back, I guess there was some reason why he couldn't park in back, so he just parked like a block over, and all that happened was he just went upstairs and went to sleep. Well, the room that he was in just didn't have the air on, so he just got completely hot, stripped down to almost, nothing, and when Frankie went up there to see him, that's why we saw the bathroom light come on. He was super hot. He was getting a towel. So when Frankie went up there to see him, he was sitting in the room just wiping sweat off him. That's all that happened. That's all that happened. I have never felt like a bigger idiot in my life. And believe me, I apologized infinitely because the next day, Glenn's telling Seth, going, these guys thought you were a serial killer. I'm just like, dude, do not tell him that, man. Come on. So I ended up talking to him. I was like, dude, I go, just for the record, it's not like I initially thought you were a serial killer. I go, this was after a long night of weirdness, and I don't know, there is something about this place that took every thought I had and we had to some negative place. And yeah, it was, anyways, I just told him, I said, I am so sorry, because Seth, and I can say it to this day, I ended up getting to know Seth over the course of time, and he is genuinely one of the nicest dudes in the world, and couldn't hurt a fly, man. I mean, it just, there was something bizarre about that place, and I left there, and I remember thinking that. I remember thinking, man, it was like something was absolutely like influencing not only my thought, but our collective thought. Because I've never been to a place before and gone from completely normal and happy to like suddenly within 5-6 hours, I'm thinking there's a serial killing that happened. I mean, like, it just, the anxiety level that I felt every time I was near that place was just through the roof. And I just had no other explanation as to why my brain went there. None whatsoever. Now, I bring this up because this is we're getting to the end of part 1 of the story. Trust me, part 2 gets even weirder. But what was really interesting is after I left on that trip, over the course of time, Gwen and I are still talking, and he's about his house, and he's getting it remodeled and refinished, and he's doing an amazing job on it. And every time I was back there, he knew I didn't want to stay there. He knew I was freaked out by the place. But every time I'm back there, he would take me out to see the progress. And it took me a long time before I'd even step back, foot actually inside the building. But what's interesting is as time went on, as he remodeled the place, he finally says to me, we're at dinner. And he says to me, you're right. And I go, what? And he goes, the place is haunted. I go, oh, yeah, dude. I go, no, I mean, yeah, I know. He's like, no, it's really haunted. And I go, yeah? And he goes, yeah, there's a lot of things that have happened there that are really super, super bizarre, man. And I'm like, well, like what? And he goes, for example, he was like, our dining room chairs. It doesn't like them standing up. So I'll have them all standing up, and I'll wake up and, we'll hear things in the middle of the night, and I'll come downstairs and all the chairs are down. I'm like, oh, like knocked over? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, in fact, in the basement, there was these French doors that I put in. And he goes, and I would shut them, and every night that I would come down, the latch would be off and they would be open. And he's like, so I finally put like this wooden latch, where like it was not like a 2x4, but a thick piece of wood that latched them shut. And this thing, whatever was there, had enough strength that after these French doors were latched, it blew the doors open and just shattered the wood that was put as a barrier to stop it from going. And I'm like, wow, that's super intense. And I said, well, you got to be careful. I'm like, because if you're experiencing this now, probably everyone else in your family is as well. And in the beginning, he said not everybody was. It was him first, but that would change. And over time, he kept telling me these stories. And I became, like any of these places, I became more and more fascinated with the place and more driven to conquer my own fears, because that was one of the places that truly scared me, and I didn't know why. And I also wanted to know, is that place, is that a place where people show up and consistently experience, spiritual influence? Now, that was the running theory I had about that night. So when it came time to hold events, I had gotten to a place where I was like, you know what? That would be a super cool kind of experiment to, hold an event out there, 15, 20 people. Let's just start small. I'll tell everybody about my experiences as well, so they know, no one's going to go into anything blindfolded, or no one's going to be, surprised by anything that's happened. And I decided that I was going to start hosting events at Dannybrooke if Glenn would allow it, which Glenn did. And let me tell you, the strangest, most terrifying, odd, bizarre event that I've ever hosted took place at Dannybrooke, and it is the reason that if it's any kind of event of any sizable measure whatsoever, we'll have security on site with us, staying there the whole time. What occurred in part 2 of this story that I'm going to tell you was absolutely terrifying, to the point where I was in fight or flight, ready to lose my mind, because what occurred out there was unlike anything that I have ever experienced before or after. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this episode of the In a Crowded Room podcast. I will be back tomorrow night with part 2. All the best.